I've lost and buried more friends to suicide than I did to combat. It's messed with myself and a lot of the other guys that I serve with. There's a lot of guilt there. There's a lot of survivor's guilt. You know, was diagnosed with PTSD, with traumatic brain injury, was on all kinds of medications, and nothing was still really working.
We lost 18 fellow troopers that year, several which I was pretty close to. I had PTSD. After I got out, I started noticing I was having trouble sleeping, quick to anger. Over the course of the next couple years, it was just getting progressively worse.
A lot of folks ask what PTSD is, and I certainly explain this to all of our patients as they start to come in and do the work. So when you go through a trauma, you're exposed to horrific sight, smell, sounds, obviously, because it's a traumatic event. So what happens with trauma that the brain can't process is it stays in your frontal lobe, and your brain tries over and over and over again, and there comes the reliving and the nightmares and sometimes the flashbacks. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is the biggest tool we have in our toolbox to conquer post-traumatic stress disorder. What it does is it actually triggers your frontal lobe to open the synapses, and for the first time ever, to process and download the traumas, the sight, smell, sounds into your long-term memory. So it goes from being constantly in your face, constantly being a trigger, to being this fading, distant memory. And the results are fast and effective.
The most catastrophic event that I was a part of was when our harbor site, the house we'd taken over, was struck by a V-bid. It was a dump truck loaded down with explosives that drove into our position, detonated. It was a really traumatic experience. I saw a whole lot of my friends really hurt. So I got out, moved back to Texas, was diagnosed with PTSD, with traumatic brain injury, was on all kinds of medications, and nothing was still really working. We had already started to lose a lot of the guys that I served with to suicide. Unbeknownst to me, I actually moved in next to Eric, Chad's dad. So after about 6 months of Eric browbeating me to go see Tanya, I'd finally hit a low enough point personally that, I made that decision and went and met with Tanya. Probably one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. After that first EMDR session, I went home that night, and it was the first time I slept through the night without waking up every couple of hours. And my wife noticed the difference. And I continued to work with Tanya, and I personally started to feel better and got better, which of course had an amazing impact on my life.
I actually managed our local national interpreters, one of which we had a 19-year-old Assyrian Christian girl, and she went out on a civil affairs mission, and that convoy got hit and with an IED, and so I had the task of identifying the body, which was nothing but, charred remains. After I got out, I started noticing I was having trouble sleeping. Got seen by Doc Glenn and went through her EMDR treatment. I didn't really think too much of it. I noticed I was sleeping better, but I didn't really think too much of it. I had been out with some friends, and the bartender put some whiskey in his mouth and sprayed it to light the shots, and he singed his beard, and I smelled the burning hair, and I thought about that moment, but I wasn't in that moment. And that's when I really truly realized what the treatment did for me. I wasn't reliving those emotions anymore.
He would wake up in night sweats, and I would make him change his shirt. I don't know if he remembered. After he had the treatment, I started to tell he kind of was coming out of his shell a little bit, not being so quiet. And then from there, he seemed to just grow and just be a totally different person from what I knew at the beginning of the year.
As a kid, Chad never conformed to rules. He never really liked, he questioned. He always, if you told him no, he wanted to know why. As he got older, the comedians started coming out. He was constantly cutting up. and he knew how to push my buttons, but he would make light of it and then come over and give you a hug and a kiss. So after he joined and he finished his boot camp, he was deployed to Ramadi, Iraq. The way it was explained to me is every day he was discharging his weapon, and every day he was picking up body parts, being it his friends, his brother in arms, or being the Iraqis. So that first deployment was the worst deployment. He didn't share anything. We noticed a lot of change in him. Then he got deployed again in 2007. He had asked his CO for help for PTSD prior to that. The doctor had said that yes, he had severe PTSD and he should not go on deployment. Well, he sucked it up and went back. Of course, he went right back to Ramadi, Iraq, which is where everything happened. I didn't know anything about PTSD. I was naive and assumed that the military was going to take care of him. The military doctors at 29 Palms had put him on 9 different medications. They made him very loopy. He could not remember things. And on May 17th, 2008, his last phone call he dialed was 12:48 a.m. We went for 88 hours without hearing from him. We finally got one of his buddies to go check on him. He was found dead on the barracks floor. After looking at the autopsy report and having a civilian read it, basically all the drugs that was given to him never should have been mixed. A civilian doctor would have known. Every one of them combined slowed his heart rate down to where he just collapsed on the floor. They called it multiple drug toxicity. Shortly after the cremation, we started getting phone calls. At that time, they had a list of over 268 veterans that had died from the drug protocol at the time. And based on all of that, with all the research and finding out that Chad wasn't the only one, we started the Corporal Chad Eric Oligschlaeger Foundation, where we provide non-pharmaceutical treatment for our veterans. You can go to the website. You can also go to Tanya Glenn and tell her that the Corporal Chad O Foundation sent you. How we found Tanya Glenn was basically the bench in Rattan Creek is where we have a memorial bench for Chad. And Tanya Glenn was actually running by and saw the bench, called us, and it has been a godsend ever since.
It works. And that's why myself and my family, we continue to work with and support the Chad O Foundation.